So hopefully now we can start. There we go. I think we're okay. Yep, there we go. Twitch has been a bit slow tonight. Looks like we're going to have about 20 seconds of latency. So no idea at what point that started, but hey, we'll see. We're not dropping any frames, that's good. And we're on to episode 15 of the CodeZone. And Danny Cron was first again. What a surprise. Well, they do camp out now, waiting to be first. So, hello. Yes, welcome. It is a Tuesday night. It is 8 o'clock. We are in CodeZone mode. Alex is here. Danny Cron is here. Dandy Steen is here. Magetsub is here. Let me pronounce that one correct. Super RTK, yes, new to the Discord. Hello, you're second. De Sage, hello. Saucy63, hello. Apostolisk 60, hi. Right, you two, I'm going to try a thing here. I wanted to try this. If I click on your names, what happens? Where can I do this? Don't know if I can do this. Oh, I wanted to try and VIP people. I don't know how to do it. I'll have to accidentally ban people with this ban button. I'll learn how to do that some other point. Right, tonight I am drinking something, and it is, well, it's very, very pink, as you can see. It's also very, very tart. Yeah, it's really, really quite horrible. Don't recommend it. Nope, not good. Tonight I wanted to talk about modalities. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a lazy stream, I think, because I've had quite a busy day today. And it does look a bit like toxic waste, doesn't it? It is a variation of the regular Vimto that I drink. It is some different fruit cocktail Vimto. But I wanted to start tonight by getting a little bit of community involvement, because a question was posed to me this morning on the YouTubes, and it was followed up on the Discord by a fellow called Rick. And Rick has an interesting idea, and I was kind of wondering if we could sort of bat the idea around a little bit, and why don't we actually do this in reality? And the idea was that instead of having 3D coordinates to describe your model geometry, why not just use polar coordinates instead? So you use the length, and you use pick two axes, and you use the angles. In 3 dimensions. And, to begin with, I kind of immediately dismissed the idea that it's, it just seems like a lot of hard work. And I think there are some fairly good reasons why we don't do it like that. Nonetheless, I don't want to sort of dissuade anybody from trying these things. And Rick has posted some code to sort of get us started. And I did say to Rick that just at the start of the stream, I'll just quickly glance at this code because it's not compiling for him, and we'll talk about why. But it's based on the 3D Engine series for the main channel. And here is the vector 3D type, but instead of being X, Y, Z, it's R, zenith, and azimuth. Now, we'll go through a few things here. First of all, Rick, you're using the console game engine. I get why you're using that, but I thoroughly recommend you use the pixel game engine instead. It'll be far simpler, things will just work for you, and there's a million people on the Discord that can help you with your problems. So change that over to pixel game engine. Everything else will remain the same, pretty much. Right, the first thing I would notice when I'm looking at this code, there isn't a great deal of code, but we can see here that he's trying to construct the models, now specifying the polar coordinates. And we can see we've got 1, 90, and 0. I shall remind you that when you're doing programming, particularly in C++, that angles are in radians by default, not degrees, so don't let that catch you out later on. There isn't actually a great deal of stuff going on yet at the moment, so we don't know. But he's saying he can't get it to compile, and this could be one of the reasons. The construct console function, I have no idea what those are, but they should be dimensions which specify the size of the pixels that you want. This is probably a bit too high resolution as well for the console. So you want to change this to something like 256 by 240, and then 4 by 4 or 2 by 2, depending on how big your desktop is. So there we go. Richard's in the chat. Yes, hello. Let me catch up with a few of the chats. The Chaz Egg is here. Hello. Joe Pitsy, good evening. Why polar and not quaternions? Good. Right, so the idea is, why do we not use sort of polar coordinates as our fundamental way of representing models? And sort of the sort of hacked together quick response I threw at the question was, what if you wanted to move the points from the origin? Now, In Cartesian space, we would just simply subtract a translation vector, but in sort of polar space, I think it becomes a lot more complicated, particularly if you actually want to update the vertices. Now, that's the key thing here. What I'm not suggesting is we just add a load more transformations onto a set if we actually wanted to change the data, which sometimes we do kind of want to do as well. I think actually that's far more tricky to then relocate all of those polar coordinates laterally to the left by 3 units, for example. I think that's a challenging problem. I think generally there isn't a problem using polar coordinates. It's just that we are trained to think in Cartesian space instead. That makes sense to us. Now, the other sort of underlying reason I think that we go down the Cartesian route is that's what aligns with computing very well. We don't have polar coordinate screens. We don't have polar coordinate graphics hardware. We don't have polar coordinate indexable memory. Working in Cartesian space is very good for 2D planes and 2D surfaces. However, doesn't mean there aren't a set of legitimate transformations for polar coordinates. So I wanted to bring this up, and I apologise for the adverts here on the paste bin. It was just on Rick's code. Yes, you need to. Yeah, that's where it starts to fall down, Rick. I think your argument that the screen pixels are also polar coordinate, because they're not. And that's not going to change, right? It's very well to come up with these fantastic models of things, how to represent stuff, but ultimately there is a reality that actually the screen isn't a polar coordinate surface. So, something to think about there. They can be, they can be, but they're not. And typically, if they were polar now, if we went and bought a screen module, we would have to just go and translate all of those polar coordinates in order to render them anyway. But I get that that's okay. Well, if you only have to do that right at the end of your transformation pipeline, fine, maybe that's a win. But you don't want to be sort of doing these translations all the time to start moving your points around. But what I needed was, and I know that there's a few in the chat here, that there's quite a few maths brains. Yes, there is a PGE port of the 3D engine on the GitHub. That's a good point, Alex. There really is. Let's go and find it, because it's not sort of linked in one of the videos. If you go to the Pixel Game Engine repo and you go to the videos folder here, there we go. There's one file here called OLC Engine 3D, and it's just, I think, it's one of the more sophisticated parts of that series. But I think by default it draws mountains or something like that. So yes, if you do start to think about Pixel Game Engine for that video series, this is a good video to start looking at. There is a small warning here, which is examine line 70. Let's go and have a look at line 70. What was that? Okay. Yeah, so this sort of switched between the two demos because there's some of these demonstrations required assets, and they're not my assets to give out or give away, so that's why I don't link to them, and I do sort of credit who did them, but I don't provide links to them. Speedy is here. Hello, Speedy. Hello, Megarev. Yeah, there were vector monitors. I have no doubt about this. That's fine, but not anymore. So it's great to say these things are. They used to be possible. It used to be a good thing to do, but it's just not anymore. And it's an interesting debate, and that's why I didn't want to just dismiss the question outright. I think it is actually worthy of discussion by the community in a sensible way on the Discord server. That actually, why do we not use other types of coordinate representation more than we use the just regular Cartesian? And I think it's probably Cartesian because it's easy for us to reason about Cartesian stuff. The maths is fairly well known for it, and ultimately it's all just down to multiply and adds, right? Everything comes down to that. That might not be the case when you start using other coordinate systems. Anyway, we've talked enough about coordinates. We've done polar and Cartesian, and the current project is in fact using polar coordinates after all of that, so we use that to represent our spatial bodies. Bring back vector monitors. Slice is here. Hello. Good. So the discussion has started. That means I've sort of distracted you all with this topic. I can now go and not do very much for the rest of this series. I'm going to drink some more of this pink stuff. Ooh, yeah, that's really horrible. I won't be doing that again. So, where did we get up to? Right, well, little confession, I did go work on the code just a bit. So I'm going to sort of show you what I got to first, but before we start delving into the code. Where did we get up to? So here we've got... yes, so I think we last saw it with some pink crosses everywhere, some cruciforms, and we had no graphic. Did we get as far as putting graphics on things? I think we did, but we didn't actually flesh them out. So I did some programming art here, programmer art style graphics, and as we can see, it's got the ability to cancel out. You can't place the module if it's in an invalid place. Now, I went a little bit further, and so this is an invalid location, but if the doors are aligned, that's a valid location too. Now, I'm not going to go through that algorithm for this video because it's not that sophisticated. It's just more brute force checking of what we've already got there. So that's really the only difference. And other than adding a few more graphics, I've not changed very much. I made it so you could press the up key to cycle through a selection of graphics, which is quite nice. So let's say if we wanted to build here, let's take a section here and we grow this one outwards. So I can't place them in an invalid location anymore. Excuse me. And we can rotate that. Let's put that up there. And these ones down here. There we go. Let's choose something else now. So we've got solar panel type thing. And what you can see is we can quickly build up sort of functional stuff, right? Nothing means anything at the moment, but it's a legitimate little editor to build more sophisticated type of models. I found this to be quite a relaxing thing. I was building all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and you can see my now infamous space scissors in the CodeZone chat. I'm not going to draw those on here. So we can build up fairly elaborate structures to represent our space stations. Now, I've chosen these simplistic graphics, and this has caused some concern amongst the community. Oh, the graphics are not very good. Excuse me, my cough is playing up today. Now, one of the reasons it was 13 digits. If 13 digits is here, and maybe you'll watch the VOD afterwards. I know he's been saying, actually, no, all of the graphics, they need textures. You need textures on these things. And I'm deliberately avoiding textures. And that's for the reason that textures don't scale. Now, everything we've been doing in this game engine so far is to try and make it so that we can zoom in and out of things very evenly. And right now, by using these simple graphics, as you can see, I can zoom in quite close, and it still looks sharp and crisp. I've got defined edges, I've got a little bit of interior shadowing, which just sort of enhances things, makes things look a bit smoother. Sorry about this solar panel sort of in the way there. And I can zoom out, and I don't get sort of lots of artifacting. You start to get some. We may want to consider sort of mip mapping as we zoom out, but maybe that's for another day. I've enabled the texture filtering as well, so that helps make it look more like vector art rather than pixel art, which fundamentally it is. Now, the advantage of being pixel art, of course, is you can add little bits of illumination, highlight, and just sort of detail that way. It's also very easy to draw in the art packages that I use. The affinity tools allow you to work with shapes and objects quite easily. When did the doors get finished off stream? Yes, so I will talk through the little bit of code that we've got now. You don't want texture. I don't want sort of noisy textures, because as soon as you start to zoom in, they will look like textures, and that's something that we've been trying to avoid. So, what did I add to the code? Well, I broke things out into functions. I can't remember if I did that prior to the last stream. So here we had a function which was check space station module overlap, and it just did that brute force thing. So now I've got one which is it counts the number of aligned space station doors. So it takes the module you've currently got applied to your cursor, looks for its doors, and when it's got doors, it then looks at all of the other modules on the space station and makes sure that the doors are lining up. And it's a count, not a boolean, because the first module needs to be placed without having any connections at all. So I need sort of different ways of using this function. If you have two rounded pieces that overlap the tiles but don't overlap the graphics, can you place those or not? It depends on how you've created the solid map. So when we've got different modules here, this is the map that defines what parts of the overall graphic are solid. So this would allow us to have shapes where graphics can overlap. Now that might actually be something interesting. I was wondering if we wanted to sort of create organic looking alien vessels, that sort of thing. You might actually want the graphics to start interacting and overlapping with each other in interesting ways. I don't want to sort of restrict creativity in this instance. But one of the things I've noticed now, and we've started to see an excellent candidate for externalization, which we'll probably do in a future episode, but pretty soon, is where we start to create all of this stuff externally to the game engine. So we can start loading in assets that change without needing to recompile anything. Whenever you see this sort of repetition somewhere, that's a candidate for externalization. And Lua is going to be the language of choice here because I like Lua, and we've covered it on the channel, so there's people in the community are familiar with Lua too. Mad Codes, good evening. Well, hello, you're joining us in episode 15, so it's going to be a bit sort of just getting stuck into the deep end of things. Do I want things that are flat right now? Yes, flat is easy. Flat is easy for me to create stuff, just to flesh out ideas. So, for example, this is the tool I use. You've all seen it before, this Affinity Studio. Affinity, what's it called? I don't know, Affinity Photo or something. And it's these are just objects which you can populate with the effects. It's a very simple way of doing drawing. The scale invariant too. So if we did decide later on to increase the resolution, that becomes quite an easy thing to do. Now, one of the advantages of working in this environment is we can specify this grid, and if I specify snap to grid, then everything sort of becomes consistent, and that's a nice way to work. Whenever I've made sort of graphical editors of my own, I've always added a grid feature because I think people draw better when there's a finite grid in the background. Take Paint and try to draw something, it always looks messy, but you take something like Visio and draw something, it always looks pretty sophisticated. And that's purely because you're constrained in where you can place points and lines and things. You like the binary stuff? Yeah, I think it's quite a neat way, the binary stuff, of representing this space. Now, we did talk at one point about how you could represent these using magic constants and all that sort of stuff. I'm not interested. In this instance, the binary stuff is more than informative. And I'll just refresh the memory of those that are here. So one of these represents a cell within the module of the space station, and it has some properties. This most significant bit is simply, I exist. I am solid. I am, nothing can overlap with me. And then from this end, we've got the north door, the eastern door, the southern door, and the western door. So if I go and pick the cruciform shape, where's that one? Hub type one. So this is the plus shape which you start off with. We can see it's got a plus shape of ones in that axis and a plus shape of ones in that axis, and we specify the doors. There's 3 doors on each of these extremes, and it's that's it. That's how the module is constructed, and that's the module you have right at the start. So that's this one. And by default, 1 is placed because you need to have something to start building your space station off. And that's one of the things I want to start sort of coding up tonight, is how do we get into the different modalities of using the game engine. So we've started now to sort of hack how things should look and feel, and we've built this sort of simple editor to start placing these objects. But how do we move from one mode to the other? So it could be that we're in game mode and we're just observing the universe doing its thing. And then I click on an icon somewhere, and that means place a new satellite. At which point I might want it to somehow prompt me to choose a planet to centralize it on. So I could be choosing it on Earth, and then I might need to specify a specific distance from Earth to set, how far should it orbit from that particular object, and I can click and maybe it draws that. So we've got a modality there. We had space exploration, then we were in planet selection mode, then we were in placing cursor mode, and then once we've placed cursor we might be into build new satellite mode or something like that. So we've got sort of a kind of a state machine happening here that will satisfy these different game modes, and if we plan this state machine appropriately, we should be able to sort of encompass all of these different ways of interacting with the game and add new functionality later on too. Can a module have doors without existing? Yes, it can. How does Lua work with the binary bits? Well, it just sees a number. And you can do binary in Lua, I think. Paint was great, was it? Right, good. So, yes, I think it's time to start really thinking now about this as a game engine. Because, excuse me, we've got some sort of different modes we want to start using. And I've started bundling these functions up to create a utility suite of different stuff. Oh, yeah, for the door one, I did actually throw in a little bit of a crazy lambda function. So you can see it's got a bracket complexity of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 this time. But then it goes and calls that 4 times over with slightly different parameters each time. All this is doing is checking one type of door against the other type of door. That's all it does. It doesn't fail early because it's a count. It needs to count how many doors line up. So it can't fail early. It wants to count all of the doors. Yeah, we created a draw space station module. I think I had those last time. Did I? Yeah, probably. And I tidied up some of the code regarding what the cursor was represented by. So now the valid position requires 2 things to be true. Firstly, that the module you're placing shouldn't overlap with anything that already exists for that space station. And then the second one is, do the doors align? And by making sure that both of those situations are true, only then can we actually place the module. And that's why it stops being highlighted red when it's in invalid locations. I got rid of the grid because I felt the grid was unnecessary now. It actually looks and feels quite nice. It only allows you to put stuff in valid locations. I mean, that's a valid location because those 2 doors line up. So it's not very aesthetically pleasing. And if you're a bit of a stupid designer, you might decide that's what you want, something to look like this. Oh, maybe that looks all right. But it was quite nice. Now, there's another interesting property from this. Let's say we were building something like a SimCity game, which is kind of the goal here. One of the things you need to know is that your modules are in fact connected to other modules. Well, given our simplistic state here, it is by default, because you're always placing a module that's already connected to the mass of modules. For example, I can't just go and place something over here. So I know that if I place a specific thing, let's say that thing, and I'll pick something else, this thing, I know that this module here must be able to get power from this solar panel array up there. It has to, because they have to be connected. There's no scope for unconnecting them. Now, I will also make sure that when we're editing later on, we can't erase modules that are in connection. You sort of have to undo the things that you want to remove, which would kind of reflect how you would assemble and disassemble space stations in reality, I assume. You're not just going to take a section out the middle and hope that it all works okay. So that's one of the nice things. We don't need to do a check for. Whereas in SimCity, you would have to do some sort of path following to make sure that 2 things are linked up, and that can be computationally costly. You don't have to do it all the time, of course, but you still need to think about it. Now we can just assume that if a module exists, they are connected. So that makes a great simplification for our little project here. Right, I'm going to catch up with some of the chats. Tutorial idea. Explain how Noisemaker works inside and why. Well, watch episode 4. Christoph, if a module is not solid and you place it on top of another one with overlapping doors, is that handle? If a module is not solid and you place it on top of another one with overlapping doors... I can't work that one out, sorry. I'm going to say, yeah, sure. Whatever's the good outcome. Yes, that would be the answer. If the Lua is older than 6, it doesn't have integers. I would believe that will be very problematic with binary. Yeah, but it has numbers, right? I'm fairly certain that Lua can handle a number between 1 and 32 with precision. Wouldn't it be better to only check this stuff when submitting the spaceship so you can temporarily have invalid state while building to make it convenient. No, I don't want it to be convenient. I want people to think about what they're doing. That's going to be a critical aspect of this game, and it sort of reflects my outlook on life. Is that I don't want people going bang, need this, need a power station, need this, and then just sort of draw lines between us all and go, yep, job done. I want it to actually be that it's a real decision in order to start changing your space station, that there are genuine consequences, that if you need to start sort of, you've got to plan it out in advance a little bit, you've got to think about making sure you've got room to expand, and if you make a mistake, you're going to pay the price for it. But I don't want it to be some softy game aimed at millennials. It's going to be hardcore and old school. Now, if you want soft drivel, go and get a DS. If you place one module with a door on top of another module with a door in the same spot, no, that doesn't count. So I think what you're suggesting is if I rotate this and put that there, would those doors count? No, they don't. They just don't. So northern doors must only connect to southern doors. So that is one of the rules here. This ain't theme space station. I like that channel mouse. That's very, very accurate. Oh, now we're hating on the DS. I can't have opinions. I'm not allowed opinion. Although I will say my opinion of this stuff is that was a mistake. Right, so I want to start thinking about a little bit of a state machine to start controlling all of this. Which is why we might need to do a bit of refactoring anyway. I kind of like the idea of not sort of switching between one mode and the other sort of discreetly. So I don't want us to be exploring space and then we're building a space station, the screen goes black and we're in space station editor mode. I like the idea of everything sort of being fluid and dynamic all the time, but the modality changes how the user interacts with the game. So I don't want it to be the case that when you're building a space station, everything stops flying, for example. I want the game to carry on operating in the background. So from that perspective, all of the rendering is pretty much the same, regardless of modality, except for the specific user interface part. So that's one interesting boundary of separation. The simulation that's going on in the background is always taking place. So that's that's updated every single frame. So that's something else that we want to think about. So really, this state machine nature that I want to add to this is just going to be for how the user interacts with what's going on. Will there be Godzilla attack in Sim Space City 2? The DS was hard because the controls were awful. I just thought the games were awful. I honestly think handheld gaming on the whole is bad. And I know that's sort of a statement that's going to get me in trouble, but I am unimpressed with handheld game platforms of all descriptions. And I've had a few. I had a Game Boy, the original, I had a Game Boy Color, I had a Game Gear, and I had a PlayStation Portable, the original. It wasn't quite the original, whatever the more recent model of the original PlayStation Portable was. And of course, I've had mobile phones. I've had a portable sort of PC in my pocket since 2004 in one form or another. And mobile gaming is just awful. It's all bad. Am I still planning to make my own handheld gaming thing at some point? Well, yeah, maybe. It would be a nice project to do some hardware stuff. I'm not averse to doing that. The thing that stopped me on the whole was I was thinking about how to do the graphics properly. And I think in order to do graphics properly, even for... See, you can see everybody gets like a little OLED screen and they start blinking pixels on and off. That's fine. And no, I'm not going to stop anybody doing that. But if you wanted to do it for real... if you wanted to genuinely have sprites moving around and at reasonably playable frame rates, you're going to need some sort of graphics coprocessor. the numbers just don't add up. You need something, and that's where it becomes quite complex as a project, because you could build all of this stuff up, but you won't see any results until you're about 5 weeks into the project, I think. You surely can't hate Snake. No, I like I do like Minesweeper on my phone. Does that make me old-fashioned? Probably does. World of Goo was all right too. That was I thought was original. But I've been underwhelmed with portable gaming. Right, so what are we doing? We want to do some sort of state machine. Right, well, let's hack something together. And this will now probably start to branch us out of doing everything in one file. So right now, everything is kind of in one place, and there's junk code in there. There's no real organization or structure to it. And we're outgrowing that, I think. And now we're going to start adding these modalities in. That's probably now is about the right time to start thinking about partitioning how all of this works. And eventually we'll also need to sort of suck the graphics and the assets into a different location too. Oh, didn't we had something on our stuff to do list? What was it? Celebrate Apostolisk's awesomeness. So there we are. Let's all send some awesomeness towards Apostolisk, or indeed bask in Apostolisk's awesomeness. So there we go. Do we have these things? These are sort of ideas we wanted to play with. Space dust. I don't want to do more graphics right now. I think we want to move on to sort of game mechanics at some point. Stars as a background layer. Still need to do that. Scaling of the world. I think we sorted that one out. Phil has stumbled in. The Twitch alert didn't work. Yeah, I don't know how the Twitch channel is set up. I had a go at trying to sort of customize it a bit yesterday, but I will say that Twitch don't make it easy. When I started using Twitch, it was just you just sent data to a server and you appeared on somebody else's computer. Now it's full of concepts I don't understand, like bits and drops and all that sort of thing. I have no idea. Do you support using vAssist? I don't need vAssist. You didn't update the Twitch description after all? No. I'm sure that frustrates all of the budding creators out there that are like desperately trying to put the finishing touches on all of the polish of their logos and getting their channel set up and all that sort of thing. And I come lumbering along with a little bit. I'm very fortunate. Got a little bit of an audience. I couldn't care less about making sure that the page looks sensible. Right, yes, so what we were doing is adding to this main game some sort of state machine. Now, shall we do state machines proper? In which case, we're going to need an enum class to represent our states. Now, I might flesh this out to be a little bit more sophisticated later on, where the state itself is some sort of exotic function pointer, and we might be able to save a few clock cycles on dealing with that mess. But for now, make it work and then make it work well. So, enum class state, I guess. I'd better get PG on Android finished then and create such a great game that you can't stay away. Will oxygen be a factor in the game? Yes, I've got fully intent on resources being things like oxygen, power, radioactive or fissile material. Temperature, I also thought would be an interesting dynamic to add too, that some particular resources need energy to be kept warm, particularly as they get further away from the sun, or need cooling. I also like the idea of garbage, space garbage too, that space stations generate waste, and how do we deal with that waste in interesting ways? Fundamentally, ultimately, I guess it's got to be dumped into the sun, but you'll need some sort of logistic chain to facilitate that. You're intrigued in what a half-hour state machine looks like? Well, you're absolutely in the right place. A half-hour state machine kind of looks like this. So we'll have state now and state next. And we need to actually have some states. So I guess the default state, let's call that state idle. So maybe we should actually try and identify what some of these things are. So state idle, let me zoom in a bit, make sure you guys can see what's going on. State idle is just the simulation doing its thing. See, yeah, space dump, exactly, right? You've got to start thinking about how you do these resources. I quite like the, is the waste processable? Is it profitable? Is there that sort of thing? And, you know, having a message about looking after waste resources and recycling, that's not a bad thing, is it? Is that a bad thing? I don't know, but it's 50-50. Am I going to bang out a 100-line switch statement? I think probably not 100 lines, but certainly a switch statement to begin with. But as I mentioned before, I'll probably change that so that the state itself becomes a little bit more sophisticated than just an enum. Sending a gigantic ball of waste into space. Yeah, I mentioned in a previous stream that I don't know how Elon Musk gets away by literally littering space with his cars. I think that's just awful. Right, so state idle. Now, let's say the one thing we want to do is start building a space station. So we know we've got a state, which is edit space station. Maybe we need to sort of name these a little bit more. So if we do space station edit, and just to make sure that these are visible, I'm contemplating using some underscores just to partition them up a little bit. Yeah, let's do that. In fact, I don't actually need the prefix of state, do I? That's being properly old school. So we've got idle. Space station edit is when we've already got the very first element of a space station in place. So regular construction of space station. Now, in order to get to space station edit, the user has to do a couple of things first. From the idle state, they'll need to click on something, or we press a button which says, right, now we're going to start editing a space station. But if we're going to create a new space station, that's got its own set of rules. So for new space station, space station new, we kind of want to go into like a planet selection mode. So maybe we have some other utilities up here. So this one could be select planet state. Right, so we don't know what's governing that. We don't know what the inputs and outputs at that particular point, but we might have a select planet state. So we click on we want to do a new thing, and we then need to go, and the game modality will be that we have to go and choose a planet. Once we've chosen the planet, it could be that we then have to draw or choose an orbit location. So it could be choose orbital location. Now that will, I was just trying to think, is that separated into two things? So is it that you first choose the orbital distance and then you choose the angle? But in reality, we're going to do that at the same time, aren't we? If we're going to sort of click on a planet and then click on something else somewhere, that will allow us to sort of specify both of those at the same time. Yeah, I quite like that idea. My variable labeling conventions, yeah. So I'm wondering if some of these are like more utility states. Some of them are going to be dedicated locations. Now it could be that we have excuse me, it could be that we have state machine of state machines here, because in certain modes, you know, I might want to use select planet for a whole different bunch of things, but what's governing that path through the system, right? So if I really want to reuse that modality, there's got to be something else that when I'm in that modality, it's aware that there's something else behind the scenes. Am I selecting a planet because I want to destroy it? Am I selecting a planet because I'm going to build a new space station? Am I selecting a planet because it's the destination of a spaceship? There's all sorts of different reasons to be selecting a planet, but I do know that I need the ability to select one. Choose orbital location, and we'll have space station new. And that takes us into Space Station Edit. Okay. By default, these are going to be idle. Can't type tonight. There we go. You have to admit that Space Station New is quite triggering. Well, channel mouse, that's a good question, right? So should we think about, how does really the player control the camera? Now, it was my intention that actually you're never in control of a ship, even though we've been playing with ships and flying them about the solar system. There's always going to be sort of an AI in control of the ships. You're building up this solar system and you're making the machine work. Right? So there's a lot of things to be thinking about. Get these basics done first. That ultimately you're producing this logistics chain of this producer-consumer network. But the twist is that because everything is orbiting and moving around, your logistic chain goes through these temporal phases of being better or worse, and you may have to try and compensate for that. I think it's an interesting puzzle to solve anyway. Are you going to have to fetch all of the raw materials? Yes, you're going to have to send craft out to get them, either from planets, or we're going to get them from space debris, or we're going to fabricate them in our space stations that have specific modules and purposes that we've built. So if we need a particular resource that only Space Station X produces, then it's got to be shuttled to whatever consumes that resource. Do you think that making your states as objects accumulates too much brittle boilerplate to be maintainable and easy to work with in the long term? I've found that with this approach, if you want to change just one aspect of the interface, that it causes a cascade of necessary changes across every state object you need to plan it out clearly in advance. That's a good observation. There's sort of this people, when they think game states, right, they immediately go, I need objects. That's what I need. I need an object class that represents a game state, and it's going to have the ability to be updated and drawn on it independently, and it's going to have a stack or something that maintains it all in the background and keeps it all in order. And I don't like that approach at all. I have used it. I used it in the Meaningless Cog. I used it in Saving Sedit to some degree. I just don't like the restrictions of that kind of architecture for something that's more complex. That's great if you've got basically a opening page, a title menu, and your game. If it's like Tetris, there's basically nothing else to it. It's terrible for a game where you've got lots of different modalities. And you have all sorts of then sort of philosophical problems to solve. What owns your resources in a particular game state? You know, if they share resources, how does that really work? So you're sort of artificially inflicting this class structure on top of your game project. For me, having use of switch enums for state machines is quite annoying. Algebraic data types would make this much easier. Well, at the moment, like I say, this is just to make it work, then we'll make it work well. I actually think the best way to handle states is that these are, in some respects, like function pointers. That way you can just call the current state to basically update itself. So it's like kind of like a lightweight thing of what Alter has just said there. But I'm not handling that just now, whilst we're working in this simple mode. So now we need to sort of facilitate the state machine, and this is where this is sort of a crucial point in the project, because we're going to start sort of destroying what we've made, and it might now be another couple of episodes where we don't see a great deal happening whilst we're starting to build this back end. So remember, the first few episodes of this series, it was lots of just circles on a black background. There's probably going to be a bit of that sort of thing again, because we're going to start really formalizing this a bit more. How about random asteroids flying through? Yep, that's a good idea. I think that and alien invasion and rival solar system factions, and you may have other things going on in this solar system. I don't know yet. Is it going to be a case that is it multiplayer? Is there going to be 2 or 3 different major bases all competing for resources or trading with each other? I don't know. Haven't got that far. Right now we're building these very simple tools to make this simulation. You did the main menu, game, and ending states in Escape. If you've not played Escape the Machine, it's an absolute must. Have you ever read a domain-driven design book? No. Right, so states. We've got our onUser create. We've populated our states. We're now going down into our onUser update function to then start wondering and thinking about what we're doing with our states. I need to go and find that. So what I think I might eventually do is start pulling all of these utility functions into different files just to get them out of the way. We had our... Where was it? It was down here, wasn't it? So this was our onUser update function. Where's that gone? Because we split that up into 2 at the time. That was convenient. Now it's not. Update satellite mode. Well, it's just on regular update. I gone past it. There we go. onUser update, and at the moment it calls one of these modes, but this is now kind of irrelevant, I think. So we can afford to start doing things a bit differently. So yes, we are going to have a switch statement of sorts. State now. And we've got to just keep ourselves sort of mentally constrained to the fact that these states are really only user input states. The game is always going to be drawing, it's always going to be simulating in the background, unless it's paused. Right? If we're in a pause state, that might be a slightly different state machine. But these are just to handle how the user is interacting with the scene. So potentially we would always be rendering the backgrounds here. Always render the backgrounds. Always render sort of the objects that are floating around. But what we're not choosing to render are things like the GUI, the graphical user interface, and the other things, because that's going to be determined by things like the state. And we might, before we start rendering things, probably want to update the simulation. And I've got a feeling we'll probably abstract the simulation away into a class of its own, which will then start working through all of these data lists. So where we've got stuff sort of batched up into vectors and things here, and we've got all of this magic hierarchy, that will kind of be consumed by this simulation state, and we will hack into the simulation state to extract the things that we want in order to know how to draw them. Because I want to move away from this idea. If we remember that the planets all inherit from a class called Celestial Body, and the Celestial Body is responsible for drawing itself and updating itself, we're going to move away from that idea. It's been convenient up until now, but no, don't want to do that anymore. So depending on the state, that's going to decide what sort of GUI dynamics are going on. Now, I don't know where I'm going to put in the change to the next state. I think I'll do it sort of only when it's necessary to do it. Which means we want to start sort of taking out some of this code. So the first bit of code I want is the ability to actually escape from my program. So if I press the escape key, then I want to shut it down. Right, I'm just going to keep that there for the time being, because in case we do need to quickly jump back into the graphics for some reason, at least we've got a pathway to do that. Let's have a look. Yeah, passing asteroids. I was wondering about, should asteroids be able to collide with space stations? Just to keep you on your toes all the time. Maybe you need to put in some defensive structures, like laser cannons or something, to protect against threats like that. Yeah, it's interesting. I see. Yeah, you see, Herbal Dan. She's sort of really kind of thinking about it now. I think there's a lot of potential in the idea for fun stuff. I just want to get these basics sort of really knuckled down because I'd like to basically define the game externally and then just let this be a simulation engine. Yeah, if asteroids could potentially destroy, that ruins your always connected assumption. That's true. I imagine that if your asteroid kind of hits a space station, probably the whole space station is having a... it's probably not going to have a good day. There's somebody talking about agile code stuff going on here. We don't do any of that here. We just hack. Hack and fail and have fun at the same time. Right, so state idle. I think we are going to need nested state machines. The more this is sort of ticking over in the back of my head, I think we're going to need nested state machines, which is a lot of fun. What did we call it? So state idle. So when we're in the idle state, it's idle. The only dynamics we're going to have are, well, basically the dynamics we're always going to have. Now, we might see some duplication here, but one of the things we can start doing now is breaking out some of the reused code into functions. Surprise, surprise. So, for example, code that we're going to use pretty much on every single frame and every single state, although maybe we don't on some states, is going to be this ability to pan and zoom. Right? That doesn't really ever change. So, if I take the pan and zoom code, this one's just for the satellite, I'll need to take it for the other transformed view as well. Maybe I can create a function that just does that. So void handle pan and zoom space. That one's space station. And we should have another one. There we go. Handle pan and zoom for just space background. Because we do the two at the same time. And that's how they manage to stay aligned with each other. Handle pan and zoom for space, just general space. As you can see, they look very similar, but the difference is they're targeting different layers of spatial manipulation in our simulation. So in state idle, we're going to do both. We're going to handle pan and zoom in space. And we're going to handle pan and zoom in our space station. Now, we may want to decide whereabouts we're doing this in our rendering chain here, because do we want to handle pan and zoom before we start rendering the objects? Very possible. Might be the case that we actually do it in a VHDL style almost, and that if we have specific mouse handling going on, we have a repeated set of states up here to handle the mouse stuff, and then we have them repeated again later on to do something else. We'll have to sort of make this up as we go along a little bit. Now, it's likely that's always going to be the case for, well, certainly that one. In fact, we've already decided this one is absolutely irrelevant in idle, isn't it? Because all we've got is space to pan and zoom around. The space stations are rendered as part of space. So this is actually rendering space station, pan and zoom, edit space station. So that's when we're in editing space station mode. Right. Because the plan is to render the composited space stations just as regular space objects, so we're only going to be drawing them at basically one location. We're not going to be locally sort of panning and zooming around the space station. So I was glancing at some of the chats here. I like to try and keep up on top of things. I notice nobody really uses the Discord to do any chatting. Do we still need some basic 2D assets? Well, I'm not going to say no, but no guarantees that they're going to be used. TGD, you've been AWOL for a few weeks. Oh, well, it's good to see you here today. I've been trying to issue sort of VIP stuff to people, but I don't know how to do it. I click on the user and it doesn't come up with anything sensible, so don't know how to do that kind of thing. What's the difference between enum and enum class? Basically, enum class makes things 10 times more awkward. Do you have a post box we can send stuff to? No, I'm going to say no. Who do you want to VIP? Oh, we've got to VIP Apostolisk because I like the name a lot. And I want to VIP TGD. And I want to VIP Speedy. And I'm just going to go through the list now. The names I see quite a bit of. There's been quite a lot of chat, so I'm going to do that later. Not scrolling through all that. But I don't know what VIP means, so I don't think it actually benefits you at all. You would send me a copy of Crash 2 and 3. I think I have Crash 2 and 3 somewhere. Oh, probably on the shelf behind me there. That's where all my PlayStation 1 games are. We've not really got through much code tonight, have we? It's been sort of more of a chat and a discussion about various things. Right, so the next state that we were going to pick is... I've already forgotten the names of the states now. Does any of you guys code with post-it notes? Like when you're coding stuff, literally physically write it out and have it stuck on your monitors somewhere. I find that quite a useful strategy. I guess you all just use multiple monitors because all the cool kids now. But I actually prefer sort of the tangible aspect of writing something down because I can write. Select planet, right? So that's an interesting one. Let's have a look at select planet. Where are we down? Yeah, I definitely need to break this up into files now. This is getting silly that I can't remember the code. There. So the next state select planet. Maybe we don't need a mass. I'm thinking of this as we go along because perhaps the selection of a planet is what spawns the menu to do other things with that planet, of which one of those things could be to create a new space station. Now that would simplify things if we start thinking of designing it along that direction instead. So for selection of the planet, the camera manipulation remains the same. Not very interesting state machines so far. But now we want to sort of handle the mouse click. The trouble is I've not got any planets to draw. So I think we'll need to start bringing in some of our planet drawing code. Else it's not going to be very interesting. I don't want any of the space update stuff. Don't need any of the craft flying stuff. Don't need any of that. All we want now is the updating the body. So that's part of the simulation. Not drawing any of the vapor. We're not drawing the spaceships. We did have this sort of manual camera switching mode. That can probably go. We drew the backgrounds. We drew the solar system. And that was it. Wow, it's really quite simple when we got down to it. There wasn't a lot going on, was there? Fascinating stuff. Okay. Let's start there. So I'll start bringing some of this code in. Always render the backgrounds. Now we know that we need to create a layer with the stars on it. I've just not done that yet. So I'm going to keep that commented out. We know we've got the two background layers. These are the sort of the nebulous gases and things. That's relying on a variable called screen size. So let's go and have a look. Where did we create that? I can't remember. Screen size. Okay, so that was just a convenience variable. I'll throw that in. We're probably going to need convenience variables all over the place, because I noticed there was another one which was the creating a version of time in double format rather than float. Where was that? It was double D elapsed time. So, quick one before we finish tonight. What are people's opinions of static cast? Right. Which is better? This or that? Answers on a postcard, please. What's the difference? Not much. Although there probably are some very subtle differences for more complex constructions, but yeah, see, not many people on the static cast bandwagon there. I do like the first argument. I do like the fact that you can search for it. Specifically, you could actually go and say, well, where am I doing some casts? My argument would be that you should probably know where you're doing your casts. If you're casting something, that's usually a fairly critical thing that's going on. You'd probably be aware of that. But hey, code bases can be huge, so you might need to search for them too. I do quite like that as an argument. That would probably be a compelling argument for me to start thinking about using that more on larger projects. Unfortunately, I don't need to cast very often on actual projects. Is it not just syntactic sugar? No. Like I say, I think we need a pedant. Basically, we need a C++ pedant here to tell us why this might be better when these are non-trivial types. You don't speak C++, you don't know what it means. You wrapped static cast into static cast. Oh dear. Are you coding in sedit script? The first type of casting is actually trying all the different types of casting. You can use static cast with templates, right? Yeah, you can. You are the new sedit. My personal preference is for that one, simply because it's very similar to how you used to cast, because of course there is a third option, isn't there? How did we used to do it way back when? Like that. So it's interesting, you can sort of see my progression on YouTube, because when I first started out I used to cast like this, and then I started doing it like this, and I prefer that now, constructor cast. I think that, I just like syntactically that looks nicer to me. Yeah, Danderstein, that's what I'm thinking. The actual setting, it is a bit more sophisticated than it lets on. The search argument kind of doesn't work, but that's what we're saying. So if you have some coding guidelines or some rules that any casting must use static cast or equivalent of whatever other type of casting you're doing, then at least that's something you can search for. You can't easily search for that. Well, you can't easily search for that. I don't know. Maybe you can, right? Because you could search for the whole thing. So anywhere where you see that, I guess it could be a nameless function argument that might pop up. That, however, searching specifically for that, I don't know. I don't think there's any other circumstances where that would pop up other than you are casting something. So maybe it's actually less to search for that one. Interesting. It's always good asking these sort of questions. Yeah, herbal dance. I think you're right. And it all comes down to personal preference too. I would say go with your gut on this one. I typically do that, although I have. When you start working with smart pointers doing polymorphism, you do end up with sort of horrible variations of different types of intrinsic casting function. So a complete mess. You're torn which way to go. Well, you can tell my cough is getting bad. So I'm going to call it a day there. I think that hour has gone quickly, and as usual, we have written no code. Thank you all for watching. I've still got loads of this horrible pink stuff left. I'll enjoy drinking that. I'll probably flesh out the state machine a little bit more so we can get something up and running graphically. Magetsu has written some code for me. Oh, I think we've got to do a PG update soon as well. Magetsu keeps mentioning this. I think we're going to get some PG updates. Right. No, I'm not just going to slam the rest of the drink. Thank you all for coming along, and I will see you on Friday. Take care.